Hello and welcome to the SCI Guys, the show where we talk about the crazy, weird and wonderful stories from the science world. I'm Corey and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, the luscious Luke Cutler.
Oh, thank you, Corey, that's so sweet.
This week we're talking about love triangles and dishonest pentagons, but first, we have a wee review.
Ooh, what does it say?
This one says, glasses for sharks. I got your back, Corey. I'm starting a petition to get glasses for sharks so they no longer have to take a bite to know whether their food is a nasty-tasting human or a delicious seal. And then we can go on an awareness campaign to rebrand sharks as our friends.
How would sharks wear glasses? Would they, span the face, or would they be two little monocles?
If they were monocles, they wouldn't be glasses. I think spanning the big nose. Do you know what I mean? Like, they got two tiny little things, and all the way over the top of the shark's head, maybe they've got, frames that hook a little bit into their gills. Just a little bit, you know?
Yeah, or their fins right at the back.
Oh, their tail fins!
Yeah.
Right, okay. I think you just duct tape them. Just duct tape it, right? And after Luke's wonderful question, I've got a question for all of you today. The question is, have you ever been in a love triangle? Have you ever been in a love triangle, Luke?
Not that I'm aware of, but maybe.
I have been in one.
Oh, God.
That you've also not been aware of.
What?
Is
this about my wife again?
It's you, me, and the fourth SCI guy. Look, it's just like...
the fourth SCI guy.
This week's topic is kind of interesting. It didn't win a Patreon vote, but it's been submitted so many times that I had to look into it. And it is kind of interesting. So I decided to do it anyway. And it's from friend of the pod, George Farron.
He was king of the SCI guys for a long time.
Meme Lord, I believe. That was right.
No, king of the SCI guys.
Meme Lord, yeah. So, shall I tell you the story of the SL1 nuclear disaster?
Excuse me, what? How is this connected to love triangles?
You'll see, Luke.
Oh my God. I thought this was going to be the signs of love triangles.
Oh, no, this is about people that love triangles. No. In January of 1961, the SL1 nuclear reactor exploded near Idaho Falls in... Where do you think? Where do you think that is? Idaho Falls.
Idaho.
Idaho, Luke. That is so true.
I am Idaho.
No, so it isn't Idaho. But no, it did kill 3 engineering technicians on duty, and the officials said, I'm saying sort of, the military, government-y people, hence Pentagon, said that it was a classic case of being cut by a coworker. Not in those words. Well, maybe in those words, but not to my knowledge. So, the love triangle. Do you want to know about the love triangle?
I do. I still am very confused. Was there a love triangle going on in the Pentagon?
No. None of this is in the Pentagon. No, none of this is in the Pentagon. This is all happening at the SL1 nuclear reactor.
You've lost me.
In Idaho Falls, in Idaho. So, it killed 3 people when it exploded. And we're talking about the story about how it exploded and why it exploded. And as I said, the officials, the army and whatnot, said that it exploded because of a love triangle.
Right.
Yeah.
And is that true?
Well, we'll see, Luke, won't we?
I just need some context so I can hold on to something.
Nothing yet, man. Well, you get to decide this. This is a choose your own adventure, actually. Do you want to hear about the love triangle first, or do you want to hear about the explosion that happened itself?
I want to hear about the love triangle because I think knowing about the love will make the explosion more exciting and tragic.
Wow. That's like the tagline for Oppenheimer, isn't it?
That's very good.
I've not seen the film.
Oh, really?
Is it really?
Having seen the film, that's pretty good.
I just assumed. I feel like you're going to make a film about it. That's what you'd do if you were Chris Nolan. Anyway, the love triangle. So there were 3 army specialists involved in this. Jack Burns, who was 22, Richard McKinley, who was 26, and... Richard Legg, who was also 26. Sorry, I was laughing because his title was Navy Seabee, and that sounded funny to me.
And he would have been introduced as Mr. Legg. Hello, I'm Mr. Legg. Imagine you just got back from the gym.
Reaching his leg out instead of shaking hands,
Mr.
Legg! No, okay, so these 3, McKinley, Burns, and Legg, they were all working together. It's Legg with 2 G's, Luke, it's not funny.
I want you to call him Legg the rest of the show.
I probably will call him Legg because I've already forgotten. I think his first name was what, Jack?
Richard.
Richard.
Richard Legg.
Everyone was called Richard and Jack back then, but... Let's get to the story. So, these 3 were working together, obviously, 5 miles from Atomic City at an army sort of base. Well, not far from an army base. It's either on an army base or not far from the army base. Either way, the army was running this. The reason the army was doing this is because they wanted to have sort of remote sort of bases where they could develop nuclear stuff. And essentially the idea is that they were developing sort of portable reactors so that they could drive a reactor around in a truck. Don't worry too much about that. But that's why they were there. They were trying to work on portable nuclear reactors, or so I'm told. And I am told that, and that is what they were doing. So these three dudes were working at this base, and it was like, you know, it was kind of removed from other people, right? Like they weren't working closely with many others. It was literally pretty much just these three people on site when they were working. I think it was 8-hour shifts, you know, so it was 3 people working for 8 hours, swapping out for another 3 people for another 8 hours. So we'll get into what they were doing specifically in a sec. But their relationships with each other, this was the 60s. These were young men in their 20s, you know? Like, what do young men in their 20s do in the 60s, Luke?
Well, not have sex if they don't want to go to jail.
What?
Isn't that when homosexuality was still illegal in the 60s?
Oh, I thought you meant sex in general.
No,
like,
with each other.
With each other.
Yeah. Yeah, not just sex in general.
I mean, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know when homosexuality was decriminalized because, to be honest with you, I don't think it ever should have happened. So, I don't think it should have ever been criminalized, Luke. What did you think I was saying?
Very good. Uno reverse card on me.
So these 3 dudes, they were kind of doing the opposite of having sex, actually.
What's that? Chopping off their penises?
No, the article I read literally said they would partake. They were known to partake in strippers and alcohol.
That's the opposite of having sex.
Yeah, a stripper is like the opposite of having sex. Because sex involves contact and whatnot, and a stripper is none of that.
Sure.
It's like the opposite.
Yeah, but so is like playing tennis.
No, playing tennis is much more like sex. There's grunting, lots of body movements,
multiple people.
Yeah,
balls.
So many balls, like at least 6, right? I don't know.
That's not okay. What sex have you been having?
What tennis have you been playing? Multiple rackets, right? No, for all the spanking, Luke. So. They would go out, they'd go to strip clubs, they'd drink alcohol in Idaho Falls, which, as we've said, wasn't too far away from, you know, where they were working. And they didn't necessarily get on all that well. So Burns and Legg didn't like each other all that much, apparently. The reason, supposedly, is that Legg was promoted above Burns. And I think Legg is older than Burns. Yeah, Burns was 22 and Legg was 26. So he's 4 years his senior. He got promoted above him, and that apparently wound Burns up quite a bit.
It really gave him a leg up. Sorry. Carry on. More science.
That was a sick burn. So Burns and Legg didn't super get on. Legg would play jokes. Burns was described as a hothead. So
wow.
Legg would taunt Burns. Burns is already annoyed at Legg because Legg got, you know, a promotion where Burns felt that he should have got it. Apparently, right? Apparently. All of this so far is speculation. You know, I don't take this as absolute fact because the only 3 men that would really know this died 62 years ago. Not to the day, but to some day. So Burns, as I said, was, you know, having Legg take the piss out of him. But Burns was also married with a 2-year-old son, which is insane. The man was 22 years old and he had a 2-year-old child and he was married. Which means he's been married for at least like 2 years.
That's Christians for you.
And he's also he's got a job in the army where he's like not seeing his family either.
And he's going to strip clubs.
Well, he's 22. He's a man's 22.
Naughty boy.
Look, all I'm saying is, and I was actually genuinely thinking this, actually, and I'll say it now, that I feel sometimes people are pressured to get married too young.
Yeah.
And maybe, and this is not me saying that actually maybe men, blah, blah, blah. Maybe if there wasn't the pressure to settle down and be monogamous and all of that stuff immediately, and it's not just social pressure, you know, from, you know, traditions and whatnot. There's also financial pressure there as well, right? You know, It makes more sense to be with someone and share expenses with that person. And in our society, you only really do that with someone that you're in a romantic relationship with. So yeah, these guys were going out to strip clubs when they were, you know, 22, 26. This guy's married, going to strip clubs, which maybe his wife was okay with it. I doubt it. But I just feel like maybe if we didn't pressure people to get married so young or settle down so young, you would maybe see less infidelity. That's not to say that it's the only cause of infidelity. There are many causes, many causes, not least of which is seeing women, as objects. A lot of men see women as objects, and this is obviously infidelity amongst straight couples. But what I'm saying is that I feel like maybe it's not weird for a man of 22 to want to, have sex with different women.
Maybe you don't have to pathologize it. Sure.
Yeah, maybe maybe it's not abnormal for people to want to have different sexual partners when they're younger. But I don't know, the pressure to settle down. And then also, one thing I'm not mentioning here as well is that a lot of men seem to want to settle down but not have to actually deal with settling down. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'll have a wife who will do things for me, and I'll have a child that my wife will look after, and I can be like, this is my thing that I own, but also I want to go out and do what I want, right?
Sure.
So there's that as well.
Especially that would be especially common back then as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. All I'm saying is that, maybe that has some effect, like pressure to settle down, be monogamous super young and stuff. Maybe if we didn't have that, you'd see slightly less infidelity, but then also you'd see a lot less if we treated women better in general. Moving on from that tiny tangent, let's get back to Leg and Burns. So Burns was being taunted by Leg. He said, "You had sex with a sex worker, haha, and you're married, ha ha ha." That obviously annoyed.
Sick burn.
No. Burn was actually quite well until his untimely death. So yeah, try and bear that in mind, Luke. No, so I was genuinely thinking about this. I was like, when is it okay to make fun of, like, not to make fun, but, to speak lightly of tragic events like this? Because I saw someone on TikTok making a TikTok about being on the Titanic. And I'm like, that was like 100 years ago, Like, it wasn't that long ago, but it's perfectly fine to like make Titanic jokes or to talk about, to make light of the Titanic, right? What's the time period there? Because I was thinking about this for this, and I'm like, I feel like 60 years, even if you were alive then, you're either very, very old now, or you were very, very young then. You know what I mean? So either way, like, I don't know how much these jokes would affect you. So it's fine. Right?
Yeah. I mean, but I feel like if your life was like dramatically altered by, for example, this 2-year-old child whose father died prematurely, like that child could still be upset by those jokes because their life was so dramatically altered by the fact their father died.
I'm not sure a 63-year-old man? No, I don't even know if it's a son. It is a son. I don't know if a 63-year-old man from near Idaho would be listening to this podcast about his father's untimely death. But
he might,
if you are,
to be fair,
sorry, and our condolences.
Yeah, I mean, I went to a musical recently, and it turned out like one of the people who were like the great grandson or something of the person who the musical was about came to the show and like gave like some nice artifact from that person's life to one of the cast members.
Oh, that's nice.
Like, so I think people do sometimes seek it, especially when it's something like something so like not to use the word correctly, Titanic, something so Titanic as like a famous disaster. I think sometimes people do seek out like what happened and what people are saying about their relatives. Yeah.
No, I understand that. I just mean at this point, I was genuinely thinking about it. It's been 60 years, over 60 years since the event. So I'm thinking like, yeah, I mean, these men died 60 years ago. All the people that knew them well, a lot of them have probably died already. Do you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, I think it's a complicated one. I think like there's a lot of stuff that's like cultural significance as well. Like people make 9/11 jokes.
Yeah.
And like loads of people make like 9/11 jokes. And that was not very long ago at all.
It was over 20 years ago now.
Yeah.
Well, like 22 years ago. And I mean, this is the thing, right? People make 9/11 jokes, and for a long time, lots of Americans were not okay with that at all. But they'll also make jokes about other things that were worse in terms of death toll and whatnot, and maybe more recent and stuff. I feel like 9/11, you're saying cultural significance. 9/11 really stands there as a sort of, this is the culturally significant, it's one of the most culturally significant moments of the noughties, really. If
in
not
the West,
I mean, not just in the West, though. Do you know what I mean? Like, it had ripple effects out kind of beyond that as well. But no, I mean, like, it in some ways is the defining event of the 2000s, right? Like, it so much changed around that. I mean, this is a really funny way of looking at it, but if you look at superhero movies, And you may think this sounds silly, Corey. Why are you talking about superheroes in regards to 9/11? Media, stories, all of this sort of stuff, movies, books, they reflect the time that they are sort of written in. Regardless of when they're set, they reflect the experiences of the author in some way, and they can be used to understand, how things were at the time. And if you look at superhero movies, there is kind of a shift before and after 9/11, like a significant shift before and after 9/11. And not just in superhero movies, like suddenly the villains changed, right? Do you know how if you look back at films from a certain period, the villains are all Nazis, and then the villains are all Russians, and then the villains are all this type of person that America is specifically scared about. Yeah, 9/11 like totally switched that up. I mean, like, we talk about the death toll there, but what we don't tend to talk about is the massive aftermath that had for Muslims, and not just Muslims in the US, but also anyone that looked Muslimy to any particularly racist, or even realistically, like, not all that racist, but really sort of nationalist, pushing them into racism, like I'm saying, not like sort of necessarily innately, naturally racist, but being pushed into racism because of their nationalism, enough for that person to be like, you are Muslim, I think, and therefore are evil because you did 9/11. That's literally, that's what happened.
What a boring joke.
But it's not just a joke. I mean, people were like attacked and whatnot.
No, I know. I
under
understand
this,
that.
it's
right. Okay, so not even in a joke format, in a punchy format.
In serious ways. So it's like it's really interesting, that sort of stuff. But yeah, no, I mean, look, this was obviously a tragedy. It was absolutely a tragedy. The thing is, it affected these three men, and it's weird. The Titanic affected lots of people, and in a way that almost makes it okay after a while. Do you know what I mean? Like, it affected lots of people in a very sort of short-term way. You know what I mean? Like, as in, people died when they were on the Titanic, and people died trying to get off the Titanic and whatnot, and obviously people's families had family members die. But it all was contained to that one event. If you look at, say, if you look at any sort of, I mean, acts of warfare are obviously off the table, but if you look at anything like sort of, let's say, Chernobyl, right? People died horribly, and it had lasting effects, radiation, right? So there's almost something there. And when you bring it down to even smaller amounts of people, it can go either way, right? Like, either, oh, it was only a couple of people, or it's then so personal that it feels off. Whereas the Titanic, it doesn't, it feels very impersonal, right? You never think about one individual person.
Sure.
Right?
Other than Leonardo DiCaprio.
Okay, let's move on.
That's the only person I think of when I think of the Titanic.
Oh wow, really?
Yeah.
I think of Kate Winslet.
Oh, okay. Well, together we have the two main characters. And you'll let me die. Thanks, Corey.
Well, yeah. Like, if it's you or me.
Sure. Okay.
No, because I've always thought this, right? I think it is much less selfish to let someone else die, because you're making sure that they don't have to go on carrying the weight of surviving, of having a friend die. I'll carry that weight for you, Luke. I will carry the burden of, grief for your death.
Corey gets on the plane, and when they do the safety demonstrations and they go, make sure you put your own mask on before helping your child put their mask on, Corey's like, duh. Idiot weakling can't put his mask on. He deserves to die. I mean, natural selection, baby.
Not that far. Not that far. Someone else's children, sure. No. Okay, so back to this. So obviously between the men, well, two of the men, there were some sort of issues, right? In fact, at one point they got into a fight. They were drunk. They started just having a go at each other, and had some fisticuffs go on there. And so their relationship was like a little bit rocky. And then just before this happened, apparently, a few hours before, Burns, the one with the wife and kid, got a call from his wife threatening divorce. He was like, I'm going to divorce you. And then, just after that happened, a few hours, boom, the disaster. So, the officials come in, obviously what happened. Christ. Obviously what happened, and this is said in a memo, which was leaked by a high-ranking Atomic Energy Commission reactor safety expert, is that he wanted to murder the guy that was sleeping with his wife. because
What?
yeah, this was in a memo that that Legg was sleeping with Burns' wife, and Burns decided to intentionally destroy sort of the reactor, like overload the reactor, killing himself, that guy, Legg, and also McKinley, who was just there. Yeah. So that was what the memo said. That was kind of the official story. The only issue is that there's no evidence of like any of that. There's like not really any evidence at all. What we do know to be true is that those 3 men died in that place.
That's it.
Well, I mean, we know how it happened, like generally, but we know what specifically caused the reactor to go boom. But the things leading up to that, less sure.
Do we know why the wife wanted a divorce?
I mean, I don't even know if she did call that. If she did call him.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I mean, like,
this is just a completely made up theory.
I'm not even joking. Everything I've just said, take with a grain of salt. Like,
oh wow.
I mean, some of the stuff does seem to be true, right? That there was those 3 guys that, they had a falling out, had fights or whatever. But the call threatening divorce, the sort of cheating, doesn't seem to be any evidence of that. Specifically, especially the cheating, right? There's not really anything to suggest that he was cheating on, the wife was cheating on, the husband with the coworker. But that's the official story. So, why don't I tell you about the accident itself?
Okay, go on then.
Is that the ad bell?
Is he feeling okay? He's quite quiet today.
Well, look, he's got to keep a secret. Can you keep a secret?
I can keep a secret. Tell me the secret.
Well, you clearly can't keep a secret, Luke, because the secret is SCI GUYS merch. The new SCI GUYS merch that's on pre-order for the entire month of October. And you're wearing it. You're wearing it right now, Luke.
I'm also telling all of you about it. Good God. I'm useless. Never tell me anything you want to keep quiet.
Well, lucky for you, Luke, we don't want to keep this too quiet. We have got brand new SCI GUYS merch for you all. It's on pre-order for a little discount for the entire month of October. And after that, you can still get it. It's just going to come quicker, I guess.
Well, for those who weren't watching my incredibly sexy modelling, I'll just tell you what we've got in the new SCI GUYS merch. Firstly, we've got a t-shirt. It's black with white little stripes around the edges, and it says, "Thanks, capitalism, with the world on fire."
Yes, that's true. We've got some Thanks Capitalism Black Ringer tees for you and your kin, but that's not all. If you want to tell what time it is, get a watch. But if you want to tell what month or day or a week it is, get a calendar.
Yay! SCI GUYS
calendar.
It's back! And basically, this is a calendar which contains is a sexy scientist calendar. Corey and I hired 2 of our sexiest friends to pose for us, and then we photoshopped scientists onto their faces.
I can't show it on YouTube. It's too sexy.
It's far too sexy.
It's too sexy.
So we've got 12 months of sexy scientists, including Neil Armstrong's in there.
Marie Curie's also in there. We've got...
Stop, Corey, you'll ruin the calendar. This is the joy of the calendars. You don't know what you're going to get next month. So go to sciguys.co.uk/merch and pre-order your sexy scientist calendar or your Thanks Capitalism t-shirt.
But look, you've forgotten the best thing of all. The thing that I'm holding in my hand here. The 4th SCI GUY pin.
Oh, yes. So if you want to be the 4th SCI GUY and have a pin to prove your title, you can pick up these beautifully designed by Corey little pin badges, enamel pin badges that say, "I am the 4th SCI GUY." They're very cute. I'll be wearing one even though I'm the 2nd SCI GUY.
That is true, Luke. You are the 2nd SCI GUY, but I do have to say that this concept was created by the 5th SCI GUY himself.
Ah, Noah Finns.
Noah Finns came up with this, so if you want a Noah Finns thought of, not Corey designed 4th SCI GUY pin, head to sciguys.co.uk/merch and pre-order yours now, along with a bundle of all this other cool stuff.
You won't regret it. Should we get on with the podcast?
Let's get on with the show. I've not said this, but the SL1 accident was the first, I believe, deadly nuclear accident in the world, I think.
Wow.
As in where a sort of nuclear reactor ended up killing directly more than one person.
Sure.
The way they judge this, I think, is whether someone died or not, and then also how much damage it made, like the cost of the damage, right? Like that is how they judge whether something is sort of like a serious situation. If someone died, then it's sort of, it's seen as serious, and if it costs a certain amount of money, that also puts it on the list. Like there's a list of this on Wikipedia, and I think this is like the third entry on the list, and it's the first where someone actually died.
Wow.
I believe. Yeah. So I mean, it was kind of a massive moment, right? Like this hadn't really happened before, and this was obviously years, decades, really, before Chernobyl. Even more decades before like Fukushima. Like this was one of the first of its kind. So I mean, it exploded the reactor, the SL1 nuclear reactor, and it killed those 3 men. And good God, were the deaths just horrific. But we'll get to that in a sec. So the SL1 reactor itself was a small 3 megawatt thermal boiling water reactor, and it had a turbine generator and condenser, so it would build heat and also generate electricity, right? The idea, as I've said, these were supposed to be portable, so they're essentially trying to make a reactor that you can move to different places. I think this one specifically was a prototype to be used in the Arctic, in just random places in the Arctic, I guess. But yeah, so it was designed in, I think, Idaho, yeah, the Idaho National Laboratory, and then obviously it was sent not too far away, still in Idaho, to be, I think, rebuilt and sort of tested. And that's what these 3 were doing. They were rebuilding and sort of testing it. And there was sort of routine maintenance that they had to do. As I said, there were 3 8-hour shifts. So 3 8-hour shifts per day, just 3 people working each of those shifts, 3 people working on the evening shift. And they had a lot to do. If you think about it, right? Like, when you work in a restaurant, you don't know this, Luke, because you never worked a day in your life. But when you work in
Bloody hell.
No, so if you've worked in a restaurant or, a bar or whatnot, the opening shift is very easy. There's not that much to do. You basically just turn everything on and go about your merry way, right? A closing shift, you got to clean everything. You got everything set up for the morning. You got to put chairs on a table. There's so much to do. And I'm not saying that this is the same as working in a bar, but it's similar in that aspect. The evening shift had a lot to do, right? And so they had to do lots of sort of little tasks here and there, like to sort of safety tasks, checking tasks, basically making sure that everything was fine. But because there were only 3 of them doing all of this stuff, that ended up meaning that there was no one there to keep logs, to, basically check up on the safety of it, or importantly, tell emergency responders, what was going on with the radiation in the plant, right? So like if, say, an ambulance were to come by, you need someone there that's like, so, very radioactive, very dangerous, this is what's happened, blah, 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 right? Otherwise, these people, these first responders, these sort of paramedics are going to be running into something that they have no idea what's going on. They could get radiation sickness themselves. It's not safe, So they didn't really have enough people working there. As I said, there was just those 3 guys on each shift, and all of the ones that died that day had families. I've just seen in front of me now. I had forgotten that, but I've just recalled, because the only family member often mentioned is the wife and son of the supposed murderer here, right? I don't want to say murderer, because it doesn't even seem to be the case at all. We'll see who the real murderer is in a moment. Now, the core had 14 kilograms of 93% enriched uranium-235. Do you know what that is?
Yes, I do. It's where you find uranium, but it's in all these really unhelpful combinations. There's some 238 there. There's some 236, I think. And you basically take all the ones out that you don't want, and then you have just the pure U-235, which is the one that we use most commonly, I think, in nuclear reactors. Yeah,
so you basically, the enrichment process is getting uranium to have be in the right sort of isotope. So an isotope, do you remember what an isotope is?
Yeah, it's an atom that's the same number of protons and electrons, but a different number of neutrons.
So same atomic number and different different atomic mass number or whatever. Basically, you've got the same number of protons and a different number of neutrons. Yeah, exactly. So the protons is what decides what element it is, essentially, right? So oxygen always has a set number of protons, 8. If I'm not mistaken. You basically need the right isotope of uranium, otherwise this isn't going to work, right? If you want to know more about this, we actually did an entire episode on atomic bombs where we discussed this exact thing. You can go and check that one out. It'll be somewhere if you're watching the YouTube video. And moving on, to more about this sort of reactor, there were also control rods. Do you know what a control rod does?
Yeah, it interrupts so when you're doing this nuclear reactor, you're firing, all these neutrons are firing around, and the control rods basically go in and like absorb the neutrons so they can't create any more reactions.
Yeah, absolutely. That is spot on. And you also sometimes have poisons. They're called poisons. Yeah, no, they're just neutron absorbing materials, so if you've got the control rods, and you can sometimes add other poisons in there as well to basically absorb more of the neutrons going about. So you've got more control than just the control rods. And so that's kind of a background on the reactor itself. So let's talk about the accident. So as I said, January 1961, the reactor exploded. It killed those three. But one of them, and good God, like as I said, this is horrific. One of them was just sort of killed immediately, just immediately dead. The one that was sort of working on the reactor at the time. Another was pinned to the ceiling by just a piece of metal, just shot, pinned him to the ceiling. And a third survived and then died later in the ambulance, I believe, or maybe at the hospital. But basically survived for a little bit, was in extreme agony, and then died. How this happened is they were attaching the control rods to basically, they were working with the control rods, right? I was going to use the technical terms I've got in my notes. I was like, this isn't useful for me or anyone listening. No one actually cares about that. So what you have to do is lift the control rods out, right? You got to lift the control rods out just a little bit every now and then. Don't worry about why, but you've got to do that. And as you said, Luke, the control rods absorb neutrons to stop further reactions, right? So if you take it out just a little bit, that's fine. It does what you want. If you take it out too much, it can go critical, which means boom. Yeah, so essentially how this works is uranium will fire out a neutron, right? Which will hit another uranium atom. And then that will cause that uranium atom to split and fire out some more neutrons. And then that will also split and fire out more neutrons, and then split and fire out more neutrons. It's a cascading chain reaction, right? And it just goes boom. If you've got enough neutrons bouncing about, it's likely that they're going to hit more and more atoms, and then that will cause more and more. So as I said, it's sort of what's the word for when
chain reaction?
Not chain reaction. I didn't say it. It's exponential, right? So if you let it go critical, it's going to go boom, and that's obviously bad. We don't want to do that. So what was supposed to happen is you're supposed to raise the control rod, I think about just a couple of inches, not very far at all. But what the engineer did, or the technician did rather, is lift it to 20 inches in the space of half a second. Yeah, like really quick and really, really way farther than you're supposed to, right? Like 10 times more than it's supposed to be moved. The difference between 2 and 20 inches is a lot, Luke. It's a lot. And I've heard 2 inches is enough. That's fine. You don't need more.
For the control rods, yes.
Yeah. And this was a basic sort of thing. This is something they did pretty much daily, right? So it's not something that isn't done often and they maybe made a mistake, because they weren't used to doing it. This is something they had to do all the time. You lift it out just a little bit, and that's it, right? And then someone goes and attaches something else and they sort it out, and then you put it back in, right? But it obviously came out too much, and it went boom, and it was, oh God, it was really horrific. As I said, it went super critical in 4 milliseconds.
Wow.
The core hit 20,000 megawatts, which was 6,000 times the power output that it was rated for, right? And dear Lord, so as I said, they died horribly, right? But that's not the end of it. They could not be buried in one piece because they were too radioactive. They literally had their hands and organs removed and put in with literally the wreckage of the explosion, because all of that stuff was so radioactive that they had to dispose of it safely. And then they sent the slightly less radioactive parts of them back to their families to be buried as they wished. So yeah, this is like I don't think people think about radiation and how insane it is. Because if one person dies from radiation poisoning or like from an explosion like that, and even if you remove them from the area, you can still be at risk because of their dead body, because of the radiation that is still present, coming from them. It's mad.
That's so horrible. So presumably, I mean, it's horrible to think about, but presumably the most radioactive parts of them that were separated and buried with the rest of the stuff were like buried into concrete. Like that's kind of what you do with nuclear stuff.
Not just the most radioactive parts of them. So their coffins were lead lined, and they were under concrete also.
Yeah.
So they were not so radioactive that the family couldn't bury them themselves or bury them have them buried, right?
Yes.
But they were still radioactive enough that they had to have lead in their coffins and be buried under concrete.
Yeah, which ultimately it's all going in the ground, but it just feels like when you've already just lost someone, especially someone so young, that's just like feels weird, even though it's more or less the same thing.
Oh, so
but just on a human level, it just feels so horrible.
It is strange.
It's like they're sent up, they're like separated from you.
Yeah, concrete
by this
feels
incredibly
more
hard layer. Yeah, not nice.
It isn't. It really isn't nice. Another thing that happened as well is the reactor itself jumped 9 feet in the air, and this is not something they knew immediately, which is mad, right? They did not know that the reactor had shot up 9 feet into the air until I think a few months after it happened. Essentially, they found that there was just absolutely destroyed pipes, like stuff that was supposed to go into the reactor. It was just completely torn. So what had, apparently happened is that the water was heated. It hit peak pressure, and then it just kind of exploded. So the whole thing, I've not mentioned this yet, it was a steam explosion because it uses water. That's how basically every energy production thing on the planet works.
Yep.
You heat water, make thing go round.
Yep.
Make electricity.
One of my favorite jokes about nuclear energy is like humans are just in this long, never-ending race to discover how to make steam to turn a turbine. Might sound really cool. Ooh, nuclear power. But at the end of the day, it's just warming up some water, turning it into steam, and making things go round.
It's making more and more advanced ways to heat up water. Yeah, absolutely. And it was a steam explosion, which basically, if you picture this, right, you've got a bunch of water, right? And as you heat it up, it turns into steam. Steam is a gas, and so the volume of a gas is not going to be the same as the volume of the water, right? It wants to expand, and so it expands rapidly, got an explosion, right? Especially in a concealed space, that's going to pop.
Yep.
It hit 10,000 PSI, and so the water was moving up, and it just hit into stuff such that it caused the reactor itself to shoot up into the air, just that pressure, or rather maybe like the sort of release of that pressure, and so it jumped up 9 feet in the air, like it totally shore through, it totally cut through all of the pipes and all the stuff that was supposed to be connecting the reactor to everything else, and just shot out all of the these sort of plugs that were let's say bolted into the reactor.
It's like a cluster bomb kind of thing. Yeah, wow.
Yeah, so it was a nuclear explosion and a steam explosion, and also there was shrapnel.
Yeah.
But big shrapnel.
Big shrapnel go very fast.
Yes. Yeah. So it was not good. That's essentially what happened there, right? That is pretty much the story as far as I want to tell it. I mean, if you really want to read into this, as usual, the references have got everything that I read. And there are a bunch of reports. So there's a full report that is so many pages long. No, I did not read all of it. I don't have that kind of time, but there is a really long report going into everything. However, I don't know how much you can trust it because it is a report from the time, and as we kind of seen, it's maybe not super honest, right? Because obviously, if the army's doing this, 3 people died in a nuclear explosion. It's the first time that this kind of thing has really happened in America, at the very least. You don't want to be taking responsibility for it, right? So that's why it was obviously shifted. The blame was shifted onto the workers themselves. But that's the accident. As I said, basically you pull the rod out too far, thing go boom, steam explodes, and shrapnel go out and kill everyone. Although the shrapnel didn't kill everyone. The 3 of them seem to have died in 3 quite distinct ways. One of them obviously had his hands on the control rod, and he just absolutely destroyed. Like his hand got like it's dark. It's really gruesome. But let's talk about sort of the cover up that went on here. So this love triangle angle. Didn't mean to say that. People didn't know about this. Sort of public didn't know about this until 1979. So almost the end of the 70s, because a memo leaked, right? But this was the sort of official story, like internally and whatnot. That's what they were saying. It was a result of a murder-suicide, which, when we look more into it, it doesn't really seem to be the case. Again, all of this is linked below. You can look at all of these sort of resources and make your own mind up. But ultimately, it being a kind of cover-up seems to make the most sense. And that's what a lot of people seem to be saying about this. So, I mean, it's just some quotes. The AEC guys were covering their asses. They didn't want their nuclear program impugned. I don't think they believed much, if anything, they wrote about them. But what they said pissed off a lot of the old nuke guys. They felt these men were doing work on a crappily built reactor and lost their lives because of it. And then they get hit with this shitty legacy made up by the bosses. Now, that's from William. That's from an author
called William.
That was from William McCohen, who wrote a whole book about this. The sort of public consensus is that it was a cover-up. Not even just the public consensus, sort of people who care about, let's say, nuclear energy and the safety of that and safety of the environment and whatnot. There's a lot of people working in environmental protection who are saying that was a cover-up. It very much seems to be a cover-up. So, if we look into this, NASA has a few slides on this that I found. And, I mean, ultimately, what seems to be the conclusion is that the rods were like sticky. They knew that they were sticky. There were sort of issues with them. So I think 2% of the time, so 2% of the time when you try to remove the rods, they'd kind of get a little bit stuck. You'd have to jostle them a little bit or like pull them a little bit harder to pull them out.
That's not good.
Not good.
No, when the stakes are kaboom.
Exactly.
Not good.
And what else isn't good, look, is that they rushed it. They just really fired through to try and get it done as quickly as they could. And they didn't test it properly. They didn't train the people properly either. I mean, these were 3 army guys, to my knowledge. I think they didn't have any... I know, actually. I'm looking at it in my notes right now. They didn't have any background in nuclear engineering. They're basically Homer Simpson walking into a power plant and getting a job on the day, right? They didn't have the proper training. They didn't get proper sort of procedures either, right? So the control rods would stick. And like literally this NASA sort of thing that I found says, on-the-fly procedural changes to compensate for sticking control rod events were accepted by management. So they just changed the procedure. These 3, who are not experts in any way, changed the procedure because the control rods would get sticky, they get stuck. And there weren't enough safeguards going on. As I said at the start, there were 3 dudes working that, right? They needed at least one other person to just get the evening shift done properly. And perhaps had there been one other person there, this might not have happened, right? This really seems to be a case of a lack of oversight and a lack of forward planning causing these horrible deaths.
Out of interest, you said earlier on that there's this, what I think is a fact, that you're meant to release this by 2 inches, and actually he lifted it up by 20 inches. Do you know how they know that? Because I think this is probably before digital CCTV.
I think it was stuck in that position, the control rod. I think it must have been stuck in that position. Otherwise, there's no way that they could have known, to my knowledge. Like, I feel like I've read that, but don't take my word on it.
Sure. It just feels like the kind of thing that, like, well, there's been a nuclear explosion. The control rods could have moved around.
Well, it wasn't so much a nuclear explosion, right? It was more... it was more a steam explosion. So the sort of radioactive material went supercritical, released a ton of heat and a ton of energy, and then heated up the water. So the water
sure.
It caused a steam explosion, right? So it's less a sort of nuclear bomb situation and more of, just a steam explosion.
Yeah.
So obviously that would still spread radioactive material, right? Because there's the radioactive material that's being spread, and it's obviously quite dangerous. You don't want to handle uranium-235 really much at all. I would avoid it if I were you. So it wasn't a nuclear explosion. I mean, it was, but it wasn't. Yeah. Yeah. But yeah. So this, I think it was. Yeah. Everywhere has been saying that it was 20 inches, and I'm not exactly sure how they got to that. I assume it must have been stuck in that position or something to that effect, because once it's out, and it goes super critical. It's not like there's not much time. It's in the milliseconds, basically, how quickly all of this happened. But yeah, I mean, it seems if you look through a bunch of different reports other than the ones by, I think it's, let's just say the military, right, that were running this, pretty much everyone else seems to be saying, yeah, the military did this, right? They must have done. They literally messed up so much in terms of the sort of, how do I put it, the cover up, that they were saying, like they didn't know which of the three men were which. So during the autopsy, they figured out that they had the wrong guys pinned for each thing, right? So they thought this guy was over there next to the control rods, but actually it was the other guy. And until they did the autopsy, there was no real way of knowing that because, well, the bodies weren't super discernible. And that was quite a few days afterwards. And so they thought that the person who was impaled, and stuck in the ceiling was the trainee. But that was not the case, right? They thought that person had made the mistake, but it was the supervisor that was impaled. They basically just assumed that was it. Oh, well, it must be this guy who's having problems.
Sure, yeah.
He did it. He must have done. He must have pulled it, and that's how it happened. And it's like, yeah, it's essentially they thought that the person, do you know how one of them survived for a bit and then died? They thought that the second victim lifted the rod, then the one that lived on. They thought that was the guy that lifted the rod, but the autopsy report said that his hands were fine.
Which definitely wouldn't be the case because you're right by the steam.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, if you lift up a control rod and it goes boom, your hands, no.
You're lucky to still have hands.
Exactly, right? Yeah. And so that just doesn't match up, right? So everything they're saying here they're just making a story to fit, not even the information they've got, they're just making a story and hoping that it fits.
And it's very convenient as well, especially as you say, like this being the first nuclear disaster in the world where someone's died, it's politically very useful as well because, whilst, generally I am in favor of nuclear power, it's politically very difficult because people are obviously worried that it's going to explode, right? There's a lot of paranoia there. And there's a lot of incentive to cover it up because it's an incredible source of energy, right? And so it's very convenient to go, well, this was just all a jilted lover and a human thing. But then ultimately, still, that's kind of irrelevant because people will do things if you put in place the ability for someone to do it. Eventually, it's going to go wrong because you can't trust everyone all the time. And someone might be suicidal. Someone might have murderous intent.
Maybe you should screen for that. Yeah, maybe you should check them out.
But also have him make it not possible to do that.
Oh, yeah,
to lift something out by 20 inches when it's meant to be out 2 inches and no more.
Yeah. No, I get it. No, I get
it's still kind of their fault.
No, absolutely.
That it was possible, even if it wasn't jilted on. The fact that this guy was able to just go whoop with something that would cause a horrible explosion.
Yeah, but if you look at it from the public's point of view, if someone does something intentionally, that is very different than an accident that was entirely out of their control, right?
Yeah.
A murder-suicide, you're focusing on that rather than on the sort of operational failures that led to that being able to happen.
Yeah.
And it makes sense why they would cover it up, but it is horrid. It truly is. Sort of just to touch on the deaths again, right? Because, as I said, the three of them died in basically entirely different ways. So, Leg was the supervisor, as we've mentioned. He was the one that supposedly was doing the cheating. He was basically, impaled, stuck to the ceiling, above the reactor. Burns, who is the man who was being cucked, apparently, he was, it says, thrown from the reactor top area in my notes. So he's above the reactor. He was just blasted backwards. And then the other one, McKinley, who was the trainee, he was the one who survived for a little bit in the ambulance. We don't super know what happened to him. They literally were calling them victim 1, 2, and 3 at the time because, of course, they were. I don't know super what happened to him. He was probably a little bit farther away at that point, which is why he survived for so long, right? Because this sort of process that they were doing, someone's got to lift the control rod out, and someone else then has to finagle the bottom of it to attach it to something, and then you drop it back in real quick, right? So that was likely Burns and Leg doing that, which is how one of them got impaled and the other one got, destroyed, basically. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, they would have died even if the explosion didn't kill them because of the radiation.
Yeah.
So like anything like that happening, you know, is going to cause death. They tried to find an explosive device. See if someone had planted a bomb. Couldn't find that. Like literally, it was just I'm gonna say like a poorly built reactor, right? Like a really poorly built, such that you know they had to struggle with it and make that mistake. And ultimately, you know, I've read a few places, and one quote that kind of is really stuck with me is, would a crazed worker have decided to die a slow, agonizing death and kill his fellow workers by exposure to high neutron fields of an unshielded reactor gone critical? I seriously doubt it. Like, there you go.
You'd just like stab him, wouldn't you?
You would stab him.
Just stab him.
You got into a fist fight already. Just kill him that way. It's easier and probably less painful for you, to be perfectly honest. Like, yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous. It is actually ridiculous. And again, as I said, it was months. It was months and months before they realized that the sort of reactor had, you know, shot up. The whole thing shot up like 9 feet. Months before they realized that, and they were investigating it, right? So like the investigation doesn't seem to have been terribly thorough. They put out a fake story to sort of, you know, cover themselves, and ultimately 3 men died. You know, the 3 guys died from this, and it's not good, right? It's not good. Nuclear technology, very useful, right? And can be like quite safe. In fact, I think it's one of the safest. I think it is the safest sort of power source that we have, to be honest. And it's got a bad rap, you know, with the waste and whatnot. But to my knowledge, we've solved most of the problems with storage of nuclear waste. It isn't technically renewable, no, but it takes such a small amount that it is like functionally renewable. It doesn't cause really huge damage to the environment, you know, in the same way that fossil fuels do. Nuclear power goods. What's not good is this poor handling, this poor operation of it, you know? That's what bad. But that is the story of SL1, America's first nuclear disaster.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So, I mean, what I find fascinating, though, is that the fact that this was the first nuclear disaster, I mean, it's pretty amazing. Or like not nuclear explosion disaster, but nuclear related disaster. I think we always think of that as being Chernobyl, right?
Yeah, we really do.
And historically, obviously, it is. But actually, and Chernobyl was sort of had so many causes and was so complicated. But to a certain extent, similar sort of cause. It was a weird bureaucratic thing. Going on.
Yeah.
And I'd never heard about this. You sort of mentioned it as like this disaster. I'd never heard about it before.
Yeah, nor had I.
You hadn't either.
No, I hadn't until I hadn't.
And yeah, what a horrible way to go. Horrible story. And God, government cover-ups. American government cover-ups, that's horrible.
Yeah, no, I just want to clarify. So earlier I was saying, it's classified as a nuclear accident or incident if it hits a certain amount of property damage, I think, or if there's a certain number of deaths. But I think it really, you tend to only classify it if there were direct deaths, because obviously these kind of nuclear disasters cause a lot of indirect deaths too.
Yes.
This one doesn't seem to have any indirect deaths. Only 3 direct deaths. But the 2 previous ones, if you go onto Wikipedia, which don't use Wikipedia as a source, but it's good for some things.
Good for finding sources.
It's good for finding sources. Yeah. And also, if Wikipedia has a list of things and you can check the sources to make sure that those things actually happened, it's usually pretty good. Like stuff like this, the people doing this are scientists and stuff studying. Like if you read like a Wikipedia page on some kind of physics thing, it's usually scientists themselves that are writing it, because who else has the amount of time and the understanding to do that? No, but yeah, if you look at the list on Wikipedia, which I just quickly looked at, you know, to see if it was the first one. I was like, are there any more before that? They have 2 more before that, both with 0 direct deaths, but upwards of 200 possible cancer like cases that could be related to that, right? So yeah, I mean, just bear in mind that direct deaths are not the only thing that can be caused by these kinds of accidents. But as I said, that is it for this episode. There's just one thing left to do. It's a quickfire quiz.
Dun 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 dun. That nuclear disaster edition.
The rules of the quickfire quiz are the same as always. I'll ask one question only. You've got to wait till I've finished asking the question to answer. The first person to answer the question between Luke and the audience, that's you, wins. What do they win, Luke?
A portable nuclear reactor.
Oh, I don't know if we should
Go on
give
to
that
give away?
Oh, I like mine though.
Well,
I need it.
We ordered 3.
Damn. Okay, fine. The question for you is, can you name one of the 3 men involved in this incident?
Mr. Legg.
Okay, I'll give you that one. Ding, ding, ding.
Yeah,
Well done.
Richard Legg.
Well, that is all from us. But before we go, we'd like to thank all of our patrons with an extra special thank you to executive producers Denito and Glitch Rabbit. And thank you for watching. You can find the full references for this episode down in the description. Subscribe for new episodes every Sunday. And why not leave us a nice wee comment? Support the pod at patreon.com/SciGuys, or you can find and contact us at SciGuysPod on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and at SciGuys on TikTok too. Or you can send us an email at sciguyspod@gmail.com.
That's sciguyspod@gmail.com. Sciguyspod.
At gmail.com. You can follow me at NotCar everywhere.
And you can follow me at Luke Cupforth everywhere.
Bye. It's so hot.
Leave.